Hi, my name is Elizabeth Nelson, and this is my multimedia presentation for EDN 334. So, social studies, I used to think that it focused on memorization of historical events, people, and places, and it appeared to be a subject that involved rote learning, where you would just learn material for the test and then forget about it afterwards. But now I think social studies reflects history, events, and people, and how it shapes our society today. And the weekly modules help me recognize this. So, for example, Module 5 was identity and cultural diversity. And so help me recognize like culture is more than just the celebrations, food, and music people listen to. It's how they interact with people and how they live their daily lives. And then for Module 6, it was dimensions of change. And so you can see change throughout history of any person or object. So, for example, a cell phone, you saw of how the technology has come along throughout its years. So, powerful teaching and learning of social studies is where you relate a topic to your students' everyday lives. And also, it's where you can integrate it with other school subjects. So, for example, the Noble Trade Book lesson that we did throughout our field experience. So, for mine, I chose I Am Malala, How One Girl Stood Up for Education Changed the World. And I follow the standard exemplify how citizens contribute politically, socially, and economically to their community. So I start off with a class discussion on what economics, politics, and social means, and then we started to go into a discussion where we talked about how people can impact their community economically, politically, and socially. And then we related it to how Malala impacted her community, country, and world through her work. So we first had a discussion on who she was. Then we watched an interview of her with Ellen DeGeneres. And then I read an excerpt from her book. And then afterwards, students, they reflected on how they can impact their school community. As Malala, she's a young girl, and how even children can impact our world. Here's an example of my students' work, and they said they would have a program where they would clean up their playground weekly as trash accumulates throughout. And then also another group, they said they want more sports teams for their school as it would promote healthy living, teamwork, and where they can develop friendships with each other. A strategy for teaching social studies to your students would be to focus on identity and cultural diversity, and it would be important to introduce it at the beginning of the school year. And so culture is connected to relationships as interactions are based on beliefs, knowledge, values, and traditions. And so this will affect how your students interact with each other throughout your classroom. And it would be neat to have your students share their heritage using a technology tool such as Animoto. Another teaching strategy would be to give your students an opportunity to reflect on their learning at the end of each class period. So, for example, the triangle, square, circle activity is where the triangle, you state three important facts. The square, you state something that you agreed with from the lesson. And circle, it would be any questions that you're circling around after instruction. Another teaching strategy would be using Google Earth, as you could like take your class on a virtual field trip to any place in the world. And it would also allow your students to practice like maps, and they can also see 360-degree views of different landmarks. And it really helps visual learners. And then also you could take virtual field trips using a resource such as Tripomatic. So, how social studies relates to the global dimensions. So, for history, it will relate to developed culture, people, the government, technology, science, and civic ideals. So, for example, how MLK affected the civil rights movement and how laws were changed by our government throughout the civil rights movement, and also maybe like how science has developed better healthcare, and also how we use technology throughout our learning and teaching. Next, there's economics, and so in an elementary classroom, you can relate it to places, people, production, consumption, and global connections. So, for example, with your class, you can focus on how bananas are grown in mainly Costa Rica and they're shipped to different places around the world. And then also in the local schools, you can explain how people visit Wilmington because we have a great historic district and then beaches. There's also civics, where it relates to power, people, governance, civic ideals, and practices. So, in an elementary classroom, you could focus on the civil rights movement, also the civic duty of voting, and then specifically with my third grade class, I focused on how Malala has helped people rethink women's rights. Geography, it relates to environment, culture, people, consumption, and production. So, for example, in the southeastern part of our country, there's a lot of farming due to the warmer temperatures and the rainfall. And then in our local community in Wilmington, a lot of events occur outside as we have a mild climate. And then just in general, elementary students can focus on how geography and climate affects a place's economy. And here are the sources I used throughout this presentation. And then thank you for watching.